certainly after the great floods and the great cataclysmic events that may have sunk Atlantis, we can only speculate to say that there could be a breakaway civilization that went underground at the end of the last cataclysm. And these beings, some of whom could be giants, others could look just like us or some similar human to us, could be living inside the earth.
You get the Mayans who kind of disappeared. Like there's speculation they may have ascended, they may have gone to a deeper plane existence that we originally came out of. And same with the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland. Like they're said to be gods or fairies or ancestral spirits, but they were originally people. I also see like a lot of legends where people coming out of the sea and coming out of the earth may tie into the Atlantis myth where we've come from deeper planes of ontology. Because a lot of time the underworld does represent a deeper plane of existence.
Anton Park's research indicates that the underworld can also be linked to creation.
In ancient texts, in Gnostic, Sumerian, even Egyptian texts, the abyss is always linked to the process of creation. So we find this recurrent theme of the abyss. And through the research that I have done, I found out that Enki is the master of the abyss, of the great deep, which also, in some ways, corresponds to the underworld. Indeed, the further back you go in history, the more you are faced with giants, just like prehistoric animals on Earth, for example, the dinosaurs.
How would this relate to myths of an underworld in South America? Sonia Grace uses her alternative research to connect the dots on the underground mythology in Mesopotamia.
We went through this little opening and we started going down and further into this long tunnel. It went on forever. And then all of a sudden it opened out into this beautiful, huge cavern. There were all kinds of rocks and crystals and stones in the walls. There was a lake and it went on into further caverns. It was enormous. And they said, this is where we led the people who did survive and got out of Atlantis before it fell. And at the top of the cave were these roots from a big tree that was coming down. And they said that when the people were there, they referred to this place as Eden. It was the place that they had that was their refuge that saved them. So they referred to it and called it Eden. And when the world came back and life was happening on the surface again, in the roots of the tree that were coming down from the top of the cave, they could see greenery coming out and growing, so they knew it was okay to come back up to the surface. And when they came back up, they referred to this tree as the tree of life.
Some people will say that these giants are pre-Adamized, which means they came about before Adam and Eve. This ties right in with the ancient description of the Nephilim, for instance, from the book of Enoch and other sources, and even from the Old Testament. So this is something that we see again and again. They fled a cataclysm, they fled something they fear, so they go beneath the earth and they claim that they live much longer by living there. There's plenty of water. There are strange areas where there seems to be a lot of high pressure, which blow out a lot of breathable air. And that's not to say that you wouldn't have to have a really advanced level of not just civilization, but technology in order to carve out a space inside the crust of the planet and to make a sustainable environment there. The Earth is not solid by a long shot. The Earth is, there's always a lot of movement and motion going on down deep inside the Earth. So the idea that there could be large spaces inside the crust of the Earth, even down as far as the crust mantle boundary, that might be conducive to habitation is not that impossible.
In my research, I have discovered maps that show a lot of these deep underground bases, or also known as DUMBs. These bases are in locations where there appear to have been other openings deep under the earth. And how do I know this? Well, anybody can figure it out because we have access to the ground penetrating radar data. This data shows specific types of caverns and openings deep beneath the earth, sometimes a mile deep. And what it appears when you look at some of these overlaying military tunnels, it seems as if they knew where they were at, so they actually tunneled to these actual locations, these ancient locations, and kind of made them into their path as they created their own grid.
There are many reports that these giants moved inside the earth, into the inner earth. According to my information, it is a honeycomb of caverns inside the earth, and there are many groups living inside. Groups that are non-terrestrial, groups that left the surface of the earth many, many millennia ago and just never came back out.
The Mahoxie Indians of Guyana and also of the northern Amazon basin have a very interesting legend concerning an entrance to the inner earth. And according to their legend, there is an entrance to the underworld there. And at one point, they were in charge of security over the entrance to this location. And according to their legend, they could descend into this world and come into contact with the very tall men who were basically giants, 15 feet tall, 12 feet tall. And they had been given this task of guarding this location and the entrance and not letting anyone else enter.
But who are these beings we have lost touch with?
If we look back throughout all the historical cycles, we find this interaction. That goes as far as even the mythic cycles of Europe. And the whole concept of, like, for instance, frog princesses and all these other strange things that we find coming down to us in lore about these people who aren't quite human. You know, wherever it is, you have an elite group that believes that they are descended from these mostly unseen beings who live under the earth. The Anunnaki in the Sumerian text are described as being reptilian to some extent, or have bird-like heads, reptile-like heads.
And a lot of people believe that they're inhabited by what we would describe as being an ultra-terrestrial species.
As described in the Mahabharata, the Nagas are considered to be a subterranean, half-human, half-serpent race. At some point in the ancient text, they are important players in many of the events in the epic, and frequently even on the side of good, given the nature of their character. They dwell in the city Patala, which is said in the Vishnu Purana to have 7 realms, which are located one above the other. Patala is a paradise, and the Naga that live there are described as a very advanced race or species with a highly developed technology. According to the legend, they wage war on the kingdom of Agartha.
The Agarthans are supposedly enlightened human beings, and they have a ruler over them called the King of the World. He has a capital called Shambhala, which is in Agartha. And from this area, supposedly he influences events on the surface world. They also influence human civilization. They either interfere with our civilization to slow it down, or they give us little things to help advance it when it suits their purposes. We get the idea, we get the story that there's more than one group, and that they have various agenda that conflict with each other.
Are these underground beings really manipulating us? And if so, how? Graham Sear believes the underworld is a world that reaches out to us when we least expect it.
The entrances to the inner earth describe portals into the underworld, and the underworld is actually a plane between spirit and nature. It's the area of reality where spirit becomes nature and nature turns back into spirit. So it's an intermediary, sort of paradoxical, apparitional realm, which is closer to spirit than nature is, because it's where nature comes out of. It's where the spirits initially start to embody before they finally densify and kind of fall into this frequency range. You can look at it as the Christian purgatory, or the Celtic otherworld, or the Egyptian duat, or the Kabbalistic Yetzirah. These are all different names that refer to this intermediary plane. That's also where prophetic imagination occurs, and all these things. It's where revelation occurs.
Could there really be beings living inside of the earth, manipulating humans? Is it possible we at one time were created or recreated beneath the surface? Or is the meaning behind the legends a metaphor for the greatest secrets the earth keeps on our human existence? Does this mean we're all searching for our own personal Xibalba? In 1937, a podiatrist named Doc Noss discovered a cache of Apache gold on what is now the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Scouting a rocky outcropping called Victorio Peak while deer hunting, Noss took refuge from a heavy rainstorm in a cave. Exploring, he stumbled upon an old mine shaft that led him to thousands of crudely smelted gold bars stacked in rows like bricks. Tragically, Noss was never able to cash in on this treasure because, whilst using explosives in an attempt to widen the cave's opening, he mistakenly created a landslide that sealed it forevermore. The legend of Noss's lost gold gained widespread attention. But where did the riches he had seen come from originally? Theories abound, from the repository of a 19th century Apache war chief to a secret stash from the Aztecs. Treasure hunters world over have come to Victorio's Peak to find Noss's fortune, but none have been successful. Many believe the lost treasure is still buried somewhere in rubble and possibly guarded by the military. Is it possible ancient treasure from a lost civilization lay buried beneath Victorio's Peak? And if so, what else could be beneath this strange area? Researchers like Greg Braden point out that there is more to this area than gold. There is actually a much more ancient system that stretches over 4 states.
What we found in these areas, not so much that there is a hollow space under the desert, but there is a tunnel system, a network that connects many of the indigenous traditions in this part of the world from the area in southwestern Colorado, northern New Mexico, down towards Wild Horse Mesa. And it is this natural system of caverns that the native people say many of their traditions relate to. So they were created naturally through volcanic environments, and then they were modified to become more useful over later generations. But what the ancestors say is that in the past, this is where people have lived when the cataclysms of the past destroyed the surface of the earth. And now we have physical evidence in New Mexico and Colorado. The geologic evidence does not support the hollow earth theory in the sense of a complete space in the center of the earth. It does support within the crust itself a series of tunnels and catacombs that were created naturally and have been known and used by our ancestors, by native peoples in the past.
It's interesting that we find this idea of treasures within the earth, hidden gold, and things of this nature that actually tie in with Native American lore. For instance, you have Chicamastok, the 7 caves or the 7 cities of gold from Aztec stories. You have to wonder, how much truth there is to it. At the same time, you have this whole idea that goes back to the stories of the underworld containing treasure, whether it's the dwarves or it's the alchemists looking for gold in the depths of the earth.
Now, these sites are very controversial because they force historians to rethink the traditional story.
Could this be true? Many of these underground caverns in North America are located in the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. This rugged and arid geographic land, also known as the Colorado Plateau, is predominantly owned by Native American tribes, including the Hopi Nation. In Hopi folklore, it is written that the Indians' ancestors climb onto the surface of our Earth from an underworld. This indigenous tribe believes that the current incarnation of mankind is the 4th world, and that the prior 3 occurred inside the Earth.
What's intriguing about the Hopi tradition is the notion of previous cycles of civilization that comes across, which are brought to an end cataclysmically, and then there's a re-emergence and another cycle of civilization occurs. That's the message that I take from the Hopi traditions, that they are urging us to cast our minds back into remote prehistory, and they're saying we are not recent comers. We lived through a series of cataclysms, and we remade the earth each time after those cataclysms. When you look at the actual structures on the ground in that area, if you go to Chaco Canyon or places like this, but there's the suggestion that we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a much older heritage behind all of this.
If this indeed is just the tip of the iceberg to something far more mysterious, what other evidence could suggest that there is an unseen power in this area? Freddie Silva brings us to another location in the Four Corners called Shiprock.
I've seen grown men weep at the sight of Shiprock, or if you want to call it by its real name, Sebitai. And it's one of the most powerful places on Earth for a number of reasons. One, it's described as a navel of the Earth. And any place called a navel of the Earth is essentially a power point, as you'd expect from a navel. And it's a place of beginning where the Anasazi are said to, and I quote, land here from Venus on a metal bird. And when the bird recognized that the people were safe, the bird went into the ground and rose up as Shiprock. You can see it for about 60 miles in any direction. It's a sacred spot. We should respect that. It's one of those few places on Earth where I feel I can actually hear the braves singing and dancing around me and actually join in. It sounds like the craziest thing, but the energy is so unadulterated, so powerful, so potent, it doesn't have to show it. It is itself. And you are suddenly reminded that you're actually crossing a veil. It's hard to put into words unless you've experienced this, but that's the power of a place like that.
Could this navel of the Earth be a place where people could cross over into other dimensions?
When it comes to exploring Native American lore, and in particular legends about the underworld, the Four Corners area is particularly important because we have a number of Native American groups that claim to have emerged there. And by that I mean they have an emergence myth that says that they came out of the earth. The Pueblo people believed that they had come out of the earth in that area, around the Grand Canyon area. We have the Hopi, who claim they came out of what they call the Sipapu, which is basically the name for a little hole as part of their chimney system in Akiva. But they claim that they had to come out of something they called the Sipapu, and they had come out of the underworld, where they had interacted with reptilian humanoids called the snake people and the lizard people. And they had also interacted with another group called the ant people. The ant people are described basically in a way that sounds very much like so-called descriptions of modern-day gray aliens. We have this whole idea here that there's a series of worlds beneath, and they all have their own inhabitants, and that these Native American people said they had come up through these various regions to eventually emerge in our world. We have the Apache, who have a similar legend that says they came through a series of caverns to our world after they lived in a place called the Old Fireland, which had been destroyed in a cataclysm and had sunk beneath the ocean. And they claimed that they had come here through a series of caverns, just as the Aztec said. We also have the Navajo, and the Navajo believe that they came out of the underworld as well. So these are themes that all tie into the Four Corners area, and it's very interesting that the various people, some of them were even adversaries in previous centuries, that they all have similar legends about worlds within our world.
If the premise that modern mankind originated from caverns deep below the Earth is true, then is it also possible that there are entire civilizations still living underground in the Four Corners region?
I live near Taos, New Mexico, and there is a phenomenon that is called the hum, the Taos hum, H-U-M. It is a vibration that is felt selectively by some people. Other people don't seem to know it at all. It usually happens between 2 and 4 a.m. when a lot of people are sleeping. And the hum, it's right on the verge of where you feel it in your heart and where you can just below the audible level. And no one knows where this hum is coming from. They brought in university researchers back in the 1980s to try to triangulate where, if they could find 3 locations where they found the hum and triangulate, they could find the source. And what they found was that it's coming from everywhere, suggesting that there is a vibration happening within the Earth during those periods of time, 2, 3, 4 a.m., that is being carried through the bedrock into these other areas. What is the source of that vibration? This is where the speculation comes in, that these natural tunnels and the caves and the caverns that our ancestors have talked about in the past that already exist are being modified, perhaps, and used in modern ways for storage, for earth sensing, geosensing applications, and things like that. So that is where the scientific community kind of has arrived, is that there is something, they think maybe it is the drilling, the constant drilling to modify these caverns that's creating the vibration.
Since 1946, the U.S. government has been using Hopi land in the Four Corners region for explosive testing. Is it possible that, in fact, these tests are a cover-up? Could the military be using the ancient power of this area to run covert military programs? Or could their true agenda be to destroy something that was discovered underground, perhaps something from an ancient galaxy? Billy Carson entails his personal encounter at the Four Corners area.
It appears that a lot of this activity and a lot of these tunnels congregate close to this Four Corners area. Now, there's well-known stone-based stargates, is what the ancient Indians call them, and now the modern Indians are saying these are where their relatives used to go and put their heads in and actually chant some words and disappear. And then some of them will return. Last summer, I went to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon. We actually hired a helicopter and a guide to go down there because I wanted to find out if I can see any of these ancient mysteries that people have been talking about. And we landed on this Indian reservation down inside the canyon. And there's a special area that was cordoned off. So I said to the guy, I said, why can't I come over here? I don't understand. I don't see anything dangerous. He said, because NASA has taken over this part of the canyon.
A lockdown? If this is true, who or what could possibly be traveling through these gates or in these underground caverns? Perhaps we should consider one of the less conventional theories of evolution. If it is possible that the DNA of human beings was originally bioengineered by ancient terrestrials, could this be a link? William Bramley points out how this idea is explained in Hopi folklore.
You have this possibility, at least within the lore. You don't necessarily exclude skyborn gods from gods that lived underground, because people had both ideas, that the gods had realms underground, underwater, and in the sky, and they interacted with all of them. We already know there are very large caverns here and there. It may be, for example, that the South American tribe, maybe the Hopi, maybe they found some of these at one time, or at least they found caverns big enough where they believe that some of these things could transpire. So it's not necessarily a contradiction. It just means that the gods operated in these different realms.
When we look at the creation stories of our past, as different as they are from one another, there are common themes that weave them all together. I find this fascinating because it is the local understanding of a common heritage, I believe, that is preserved in the traditions of the modern indigenous peoples. One of the most obvious of these common threads is the theme of another world beneath this one, a world, subterranean world, from which our ancestors emerged.
A lot of these themes from Native American folklore have found their way into modern day accounts of what I call modern folklore, which would be ufology, cryptozoology, all these types of things, conspiracy literature. Really, all this stuff is just an update of folklore. It's the same stuff that people have done for centuries. Sometimes it contains truth, sometimes it contains fabrications, sometimes people elaborate on what they think something means. But we see these ideas of underworlds involved with variety of peoples around the world now emerging in these same areas. All these things touch on this same type of material.
With these subterranean creation stories of the world from which our ancestors emerged, is there perhaps a code or a treasure that could have been left for us to figure out the truth of humanity's connections to the Four Corners?
Robert Bivall, welcome to Disclosure. I'm really happy to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure. I think a lot of people don't understand this about my relationship with the Casey Foundation. I've never met Casey. He died in 1945, before I was born. I was born in 48, in case you're interested. And I think he was a good man. I mean, I have no doubt. He was genuine. And for all I know, he had an intuition that made him know that there was something going on at Giza, at the temple. However, many years after his death, one of his sons, Hewlin Casey, when the Casey Foundation was founded in Virginia Beach, the ARE, the Association of Research and Enlightenment, decided that he was going to do something about this. He was going to try and find this Hall of Records. And the story is that he recruited a young man at the time, a fellow called Mark Lehner, who's now one of the top Egyptologists, sent him to Egypt to study at the American University, Cairo, and with a very sort of almost naive mission, find us a way to look for the Hall of Records. Amazingly, Lehner got very friendly with the then Chief Inspector of Giza, Dr. Zahia, who became eventually Minister, Dr. Zahia was. And through this liaison, they had their first attempt in 1978. At the time, the Stanford Research Institute was doing research with radars for the University of Cairo. And Lehner got to know the director there, a fellow called Lambert Dolphin, if I remember well. Yeah. And kind of struck a deal saying, okay, if you lend us your name and your equipment, we'll fund it. The Casey are ready to fund it. So they formed a kind of joint venture. And the idea was to use the radars of the Stanford Research Institute to locate or identify cavities under the Sphinx, especially what Casey had said, somewhere around the left pole or right pole.
So this is ground-penetrating radar, and it can...
Well, it was very primitive in those days. It was the 70s, but it could detect cavities. They couldn't be sure whether it was natural cavity. And the idea was to drill and find out if there was something there.
To drill down in?
Indeed, and they did. I mean, they did 5 drills. They couldn't conclusively. I mean, it was very disappointing for Hewlin Casey because the project was stopped just on the 11th hour where they thought they might strike something. The story goes that they were hoping to get back, and Hawass and Lehner, who had become very, very good friends at the time. Now, it's been denied many times by Hawass, but the L. Casey Foundation claims that they had a plan, a long-term plan. They wanted to groom Hawass to become a PhD in Egyptology. He needed a PhD to advance within the antiquity. He denies it. They claim that they paid or arranged for a scholarship for him to study at the University of Pennsylvania. He did. He spent 7 years there, and when he returned, he was immediately placed as Director General of the Giza Pyramids. So there he is in 1987, I think, when he returned.
Well, and I heard the same story from the ARE. I lived in Virginia Beach.
Oh, did you?
And I passed Zahi Hawass in my car on 22nd Street.
Oh, well, there. Well, look, I've written a whole book about this, by the way, which has just been republished. In any case, leaving that aside, there was another attempt to look for this Hall of Records when John West and Robert Schoch wanted to investigate the erosion of the Sphinx. You know the background to this. John West approached Robert Schoch at Boston University. He got interested. They went on a preliminary visit, and they were looking for funds using the Boston University as a front, and Casey Foundation offered the funds. And they went there, I think it was 1991, this time with seismographs. The idea was to send shock waves around the Sphinx and through the Sphinx to see if there were cavities. And that produced the possibility of a rectangular chamber under the pores of the Sphinx. At that time, like I said, by sheer synchronicity, I was writing the Orion Mystery, unknown to me that they were doing this.
Right.
And Rudolf Gantenbrink, the German robotic engineer, was exploring the Great Pyramid in the shafts. All this was going on at the same time, and we didn't know each other.
These are the shafts that come out of the Queen's Chamber,
Correct.
pointing towards stars.
Yes, inside the Great Pyramid there are 3 chambers, a subterranean chamber, a so-called Queen's Chamber in the superstructure, and above it the King's Chamber. From these chambers shoot shafts from the north and south wall. The ones in the King's Chamber shoot right through, out of the pyramid. The ones in the Queen's Chamber stop. Nobody knew where, but they didn't pierce the pyramid. And until 1993, nobody had bothered to explore them. There's been attempts with rods and things, but nobody had thought of sending a machine up there, a robotic machine. The first man to come up with this idea was Rudolf Gantenbrink. And in March of '93, while John West and Robert Schoch were preparing their presentation for the Geological Association, and while I was writing the Orion Mystery, I happened, it's a strange story. I mean, Professor Edwards was still alive, said, listen, I've heard the Germans are exploring the pyramid with a machine, you know, it was all hush-hush. Why don't you go to Egypt and I'll give you a letter of recommendation and find out what they're doing. So, of course, with the letter of recommendation of Sir Ivan Edwards, I was well received, and they introduced me to Rudolf Gantenbrink, unknown to all of us, 7 days before he made the discovery. I got very friendly with Rudolf. He was a very, very generous guy. He offered to give me data. I wanted data for the... He was going to measure the angle of the shots with lasers. I needed precise measurements to measure the alignment to the pit, to the stars. I returned, I was living in England at the time, I returned to England, and he phoned me on the 1st of April, I thought it was April Fool, saying I found the door inside the pyramid, and that's hell broke loose. I mean, he asked me to help him put this in the news. We broke the news in England, and as you know, it went viral, is the jargon now. And so all this was going on. Coming back to the Casey Foundation, nothing happened after '93. I mean, there was a huge, huge interest in finding out, because they did a program with Charlton Heston, The Mysteries of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
It was exposed to the American public around the world that there might be a chamber under the Sphinx. Of course, huge pressure on the Egyptian authorities to allow this, but they kind of blocked it. A lot of politics went shooting about. But finally, in a couple of years later, in '95, 2 members of the Casey Foundation, and funders, life members, a fellow called, he's dead now, Joseph Shore, with another one called Joseph Jehoda. We used to call them the 2 Joes. Joseph Jehoda had been one of the funders and directors of the earlier projects. Shore had funded the, I think, the '93 project of West, or partly funded, and now they took it upon themselves to try and find these hollow records on behalf of the Casey Foundation. Shore created the Shore Foundation. With Zahi Hawass got a 5-year license in '95 to look for these hollow records clandestinely, because of course the Egyptian authorities were not going to allow this openly. The official reason was that they were going to repair chasms and faults and clean up the necropolis. And they got very, very close to find something. At the time, it was known that there was a deep shaft behind the Sphinx. This shaft had been known for many years, but it was flooded with water. The water had been pumped by Zahi Hawass. They went down there, and with their radars found, or believed they detected a tunnel leading towards the Sphinx. And strangely enough, leading to that area where in '93 they had detected a possible chamber. Unfortunately, everything was stopped at this stage, so the story stops there. And of course, with a lot of attempts by many to try and get permits to explore the pyramid, but unfortunately, so far nobody has managed to convince the authorities to allow further exploration. There you are. So that's the story of finding the secret chambers. I'm convinced. I don't know about the chamber under the Sphinx. Evidence suggests there is something there. Now, whether it's a hall of records, I don't know.
Well, that's all the time we have for this particular episode, but I want to thank you for being here.
It was a pleasure.
It's a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much. Thank you.